Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing a San Jose Sharks 23-24 prospect update. We are smack dab in the middle of the short NHL holiday break, as well as one day before the beginning of the 2024 World Juniors in Sweden. And as such, what better time than to take a look at how some of the Sharks prospects around the different hockey leagues in the world have been doing thus far this season. Now, it should be noted that in previous years, I've had to at times scrape the bottom of the barrel in terms of Sharks prospects because their prospect pool back in the day was not particularly good, a consequence of being a successful NHL team. But these days, since the Sharks have been quite bad over these past few seasons, they actually end up with one of the better prospect pools in the entire league, and as such there was not a lack of players to include in this video. I have 12 of them, and there were even a few left off this list. On top of that, I also had to institute a rule where I would not be talking about any players who have played at the very least only a single game in the NHL at some point in their careers. This is why you will notice the very notable absences of players like Daniil Gushin, Henry Thrun, and Thomas Bordeleau, yet we still ended up with 12 players to talk about. And starting off immediately in the NCAA, we of course have Will Smith. You could not possibly start a Sharks prospect update without him being the number one guy, because he is widely considered one of, if not the best prospects currently around the world that is not in the NHL at this point. This is sort of a consequence of him having been the fourth overall pick of the 2023 draft, one of the best drafts of memory, or at least it is expected to be one of the best drafts of memory. In fact, the three players who were drafted before Will Smith, Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli, and Leo Carlsson, are all currently making a pretty positive impact and substantial impact in the NHL with their respective teams at just the age of 18. And so the expectations on Will Smith's shoulders has been massive this season, even though he is committed to college for this year. And having watched him, it is, a pretty good season. Objectively, his point totals are quite solid. 17 games played, 8 goals, 15 assists for 23 points. If this were any other prospect, you would think that this is quite good, tied for 10th in that league in terms of points for freshman players, which Will Smith is. He is 6th in that list, but for the expectations that he did have, it might be somewhat disappointing for some people, especially when you look at those Bedards, that Carlson, that Fantilli, the three players drafted above him who are making a strong impact at the NHL level. You were hoping that Will Smith could have like a dominant performance in college that makes you believe that he could jump into it immediately next season and have a similar style of performance. Now, we're not going to discount that that is possible. You never know, but it has been maybe somewhat underperforming for Will Smith, but yeah, does have an opportunity to really make a name for himself coming up tomorrow. He is at the World Juniors with the United States. He's not a number one guy for them, as per usual when it comes to the World Juniors, because of the disparity between players of different ages at that age, at the teenage years. 19-year-old players are going to be favored over 18-year-old players, especially since Will Smith could perhaps have another opportunity at the World Juniors next year, the 2025 World Juniors tournament, if the Sharks allow him to go at that point. But if he could perhaps sort of assert himself as a big player for the U.S. as the tournament goes on and end up putting up a decent amount of points, well, that will do a very good job at sort of getting his expectations back on track here as a San Jose Sharks prospect. So all the eyes are going to be on him, not even just from Sharks fans, but just from NHL scouts in general, and we shall see how he performs. Next, we have Cam Lund sticking here in the NCAA. 13 games played, 6 goals, 7 assists for 13 points. Now, Lund is at that age where he's the final year of eligibility for the World Junior Championships. Last season, he was invited to the camp but did not end up making the team. This year, it seemed as though he would have an opportunity to make it. It was almost certainly penciled in to be a guy on the team, but unfortunately would be injured just a few days before the sort of break of the college season to head into the World Junior Championships, and as such he's not going to be on the team this season. An unfortunate break here for sure for Cam Lund, who was having a pretty solid season up to that point. He's still doing some good things. He had a hat trick actually in a game against Will Smith, which was certainly nice to see. A point per game pace, obviously not the expectations of a Will Smith, but could perhaps be a player for the San Jose Sharks within the next couple of years. Currently a sophomore at the NCAA level with Northeastern. And then finally, we have Eric Polkamp here, a defenseman prospect for the San Jose Sharks, drafted in the 5th round of this past draft in 2023. 16 games played, 4 goals, 5 assists, 9 points. And you might not think those numbers are necessarily jumping off the page, and they're not, but Polkamp is much more of a sort of defensive type of player, has a very good shot from the point, but definitely more so of a shutdown type of guy. But what's most notable about Polkamp is actually that he is going to be on the World Juniors team for the United States that is, as I said, starting tomorrow. So he has certainly impressed enough scouts, enough people around the hockey world that he was able to get onto a pretty prestigious position on the U.S. World Juniors team. So definitely a solid look, or we're going to be getting a solid look at him for this particular tournament. Next, we move on to the AHL, the players who are sort of right at the cusp of being able to make it to the NHL at this point, and we shall start off with defenseman Shakir Mukhamadullin, picked up in the Timo Meier trade near the trade deadline of last season. A bit of a slow start to his AHL career with the San Jose Barracuda, but definitely has been picking it up as of late. 26 games played, 4 goals, 14 assists, 18 points. Not the highest scoring defenseman for the San Jose Barracuda, but definitely right up there as well. Plays some strong power play time. His plus minus on a relatively not so good Barracuda team is actually quite solid. I believe it's like a -3 or a -4. So he's been doing some good things. Will he get an opportunity to play with the San Jose Sharks this season? It's perhaps possible as we move later on into the year, past the trade deadline, perhaps like we saw last season. But it's also possible he gets the entirety of the season seasoned there in the AHL. He's been doing some good things, and he's still continuing to pan out as a perhaps future top 4 defenseman for the Sharks. Next, we have Leon Gawanke, picked up from the Winnipeg Jets, sort of, signed by the San Jose Sharks, off of the idea that he would get an opportunity to play in the NHL this season, something that he was not able to do with the Winnipeg Jets at any point, and yet he has found himself at the beginning of this season stapled to the AHL. He's been putting up a good amount of points. He's only second on the team to Danil Gushin in terms of points, with 26 games played, 5 goals, 15 assists, 20 points. And so unlike with Mukhamadullin, who I would not be surprised to see play the entirety of this season, the rest of it with the Barracuda, maybe a game or 2 up, I imagine Gawanke will get an opportunity sooner rather than later. At this point, it just feels as though you can't really have signed him with the guarantee that, don't sign with in Germany like you were planning to do so, because we'll give you some NHL time, and then not give him that NHL time. So I would imagine Gawanke will at some point get the opportunity, and honestly, it wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world. While the Sharks are running with a pretty strong first power play unit at this point, thanks to 5 forwards because of the really strong step-up performance from Mikael Granlund, the second power play unit is rolling with Jacob McDonald, who certainly hasn't been bad, but is maybe not super optimal for the San Jose Sharks, and so I don't think Leon Gawanke will have to wait too long to get that chance. And then finally, we have Ethan Cardwell here in the AHL, definitely a player who is very much under the radar in the Sharks prospect pool. When you think of the AHL this season for San Jose, you think of Bordelot, you think of Gushin, you think of Mukhamadullin, but you don't really think of Ethan Cardwell, and yet he finds himself 3rd in terms of points on the team at this point. 25 games played, 9 goals, 10 assists, 19 points. Pretty unassuming player, a 4th round draft pick from a couple of years ago, stayed in the OHL for his overage season, dominated in a sense there, but not that much of a surprise. We've seen players like Brandon Coe somewhat recently dominate at an OHL level and then make the transition to his rookie season in the AHL and not really do much of anything. But Cardwell has made the jump to the AHL and has made that jump in stride with the amount of points that he's managing to put up. And what's most interesting about Cardwell is that a lot of the times about these forwards who are able to put up a large amount of points at the AHL is always the question of whether they can translate their game to the NHL. For instance, if we take an example of Danil Gushin, who is almost a point per game currently with the San Jose Barracuda, The major question is, and what we have seen briefly in his short stints in the NHL, that he may very well be able to do so, but the major question is, can he translate his game to an NHL level? Because as the way Gushchin plays, if he's not really going to be like a top 6 or maybe a top 9 power play specialist with the San Jose Sharks, it's hard to really find him a spot because he doesn't necessarily have anything else in his game that he excels at an NHL level. But when it comes to Ethan Cardwell, he's not some sort of pure offensive top 6 or bust type of player. He plays in such a way that you could easily fit him into the bottom 6 of any NHL team, at least once he's at that level to play in the NHL. So the fact that he's able to put up this amount of points while also being a responsible player, if we take a look at his plus minus, he's one of the very, very few players on the San Jose Barracuda who actually is a positive in terms of his plus minus. If we imagine that, he could be the type of player who gets with the San Jose Sharks main roster as soon as next season, depending on how things actually go. So definitely a dark horse type of player in the Sharks prospect pool. Moving on to the SHL, as we go overseas here, we have both Philip Bystedt and Matthias Havlat playing for the same team, and you will notice when it comes for both of these players that their point totals are not exactly as impressive as most of the other players on this list, but that is because, of course, that the SHL is more of a man's league. The NCAA, the CHL, you're playing against teenagers, players in their young 20s, but in the SHL, you're playing against players who are, mid-20s or late 20s, in their 30s as well. And what on top of that, this isn't a developmental league. In the AHL, you could sort of, since it's in your organization, you could sort of let them know, hey, I want you to play this prospect more minutes than not because, hey, we want them to be able to develop. But you can't really go to an SHL team and tell them that. And so when it comes to both Bystedt and Havlat, their ice time is not super high on the team that they are currently playing on, which is why they're not exactly putting up a ton of points. But when it comes to Bystedt's performance, 26 games played, 4 goals, 5 assists, 9 points. The major thing to watch with Bystedt is going to be his World Juniors coming up tomorrow with Sweden. Was one of the best players, not only with Sweden last season, but in the entire tournament. Obviously overshadowed by the incredible performance of a player like Connor Bedard. But if you looked past him, Bystedt, one of the best of the tournament. And we shall see now that he is a year older and is expected to be able to repeat that performance, how he actually looks. And it's definitely going to be a slightly better look than what we see from him in the SHL, because when you get like less than 10 minutes of ice time per night, you're not exactly expected to dominate the ice either. And then the same would go for Matthias Havlat. Doesn't even necessarily get every single game in the SHL, sometimes injured here or there, what have you, but he's also going to be making it to the World Juniors this season. 26 games played, 1 goal and 7 assists for 8 points. And so Sweden, definitely a team to keep an eye on there, as we shall see how these players can perform when playing against their peers compared to otherwise. And then finally we have the CHL, and let us start off with Kasper Haltunen is also going to be at the World Juniors. He will be with the Finnish team, currently in the OHL, 28 games played, 20 goals, 11 assists for 31 points. The major strength, as we know from Haltunen in his game, is his shot. He's putting up a ton of goals with the London Knights in the OHL, but that is an opportunity where we're going to be able to see just how one-dimensional or two-dimensional or three-dimensional or what have you this player is, because when he is playing in a best-on-best type of tournament like the World Juniors is, he's not going to be in as many positions to just be able to get a shot off, to plant himself in one area and just absolutely rocket one on the net. And so we'll see if Haltunen is able to sustain this type of performance like he has been doing in the OHL, or is going to get overshadowed by other players. It should, of course, be noted that Haltunen was just drafted this past season. As such, he is just 18 years of age, meaning he will have another opportunity with Team Finland at the World Juniors next season. So he's not necessarily expected to absolutely dominate this tournament, but it's going to be a good chance to see what he can do in a higher stakes environment with a higher level of competition. Next, we get to Jake Furlong, a player who also is somewhat under the radar with the San Jose Sharks. 29 games played, 1 goal, 19 assists for 20 points. He was drafted a couple of years ago in the the 5th round by the San Jose Sharks. But very notably is that he has managed to make Team Canada here at the World Juniors. And Team Canada, perhaps the best World Juniors team. They were the victors last season. And so it is an extremely competitive group of players to actually be able to make the team of. And so the fact that Jake Furlong managed to crack that roster is extremely impressive. He's been having a very good season thus far. He played a decent amount of preseason/rookie tournament games with the San Jose Sharks at the beginning of this season back in training camp, and he never looked super impressive, but perhaps his junior play was strong enough to get the eyes of that Team Canada squad on him, and it'll definitely also be quite cool to watch what he can do on a very, very strong Canadian team. Next, we move on to Quentin Musty, the Sharks' other first-round pick of this past draft. Obviously, Will Smith was the big name, drafted 4th overall with the Sharks' own pick, but with the pick picked up from the Devils in the Timo Meier trade, the Sharks chose Quentin Musty, who seemed to be a steal at that point in the draft, and he's certainly playing as such. 20 games played, he's already sitting at 15 goals, 23 assists for 38 points. That is almost 2 points per game, and in fact, it actually leads the OHL in terms of points per game. But of course, the major snub here, as you would expect, well, of course he's on the World Juniors team, is that's not actually true. Musty did not make it on the American World Juniors team. Definitely one of the bigger snubs of the tournament, at least from a San Jose Sharks fan perspective. So it's going to be unfortunate to not see him being able to perform there, but he's been having an exceptional season thus far with Sudbury in the OHL. Like I said, leads that league in terms of points per game percentage. The major sort of issue with Musty is that he's actually been suspended a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken, thus far this season. So he certainly plays with an edge, but you want them to be able to walk that line where you don't cross it too many times, and Musty has done so at this point this season. So while you do kind of like it, you also wish to maybe phase it out of his game slightly, but in terms of offense, he's been absolutely lights out. And then finally, we have defenseman Luca Cagnoni. He is also having an exceptional season in the WHL. 30 games played, 5 goals, 34 assists for 39 points. That is second in the WHL in terms of defensive scoring, and he was a 4th round pick in the 2023 draft as an undersized defenseman. And so taking a look at these points, it's quite obvious that he is very, very good from an offensive standpoint, but we cannot make any sort of sweeping conclusions about how he may look in the future in the NHL because of his small stature. Will he be able to adapt to the game and use the sort of skills that he has to be able to fit in that place? Who knows? But at this point, he's in definitely a very good path in his development. Will not be playing at the World Juniors, which is really not that much of a surprise. He is a Canadian. He is 18 years of age. And as I said, the Canadian team is extremely competitive to be able to make it on. And especially defensemen, you're looking to try and take these 1 year older players, these 19-year-old players, because again, physically, you're much more developed as a 19-year-old than you are as an 18-year-old. So Cagnoni, if he is eyeing a World Junior spot, it likely would come next season if he's able to continue this type of point pace, but it's definitely been a great start to his post-draft career. But that will do it for this video. The Sharks prospect pool, like I mentioned, is one of the best currently in the NHL, probably finding itself at some point in the top 10 at this point. And in the upcoming World Juniors, the Sharks will have multiple players to watch, from Team USA to Team Finland to Team Sweden to even Team Canada. And so whoever might be playing on any given day, the Sharks and Sharks fans will have a player to watch. Class dismissed.